it's Sandra Mazili here from Inner Action Counselling. Visit me at www.inneractioncounselling.co.uk. Counselling is spelt with 2 L's here in England. The following is a presentation for the American Council of the Blind, where I'm talking about how to choose a therapist. ACB's policy is that all cameras are off, which is why mine is off now, as well as during the workshop itself. And it's why I'm using YouTube subtitler, so apologies for any mistakes it makes. I'm a blind counsellor, so in order to get videos edited and subtitled, I have to pay for it, and I pay rather a lot of money for it. So any opportunity I can take to do things myself, however badly, I take it. It was a live recording, but it's going to sound really spliced together and a bit computery because I'm trying to keep the length down. So I've taken a Stanley knife to the liveness. Because this presentation is aimed at an American audience, there are references to how therapists work in America, training, licensing, etc. But everything else in the presentation I cover will be relevant to you wherever you are in the world, so enjoy the session. Right, it's the top of the hour, so welcome everyone to this session of Mind Your Mind. It's called Swipe Right on Therapy. It's just a bit of a play on words about the kind of dating apps and things, because just like dating, therapists, there's so many different options out there. So I will be taking you through some ideas I have of how to narrow that list down a wee bit, because I'm a qualified therapist myself, and I've had therapy myself, so I can give you some insights from both sides of that table. So the presentation-y section, where it's just me talking as a soloist, will be aired on my YouTube channel. The second bit will not be on my YouTube channel, so while you can be a bit more at ease, the whole session will be on the Clubhouse replay, so I would ask you to keep personal details about yourselves and circumstances as much to a minimum as possible. So, how to choose a therapist. It's a faff. I know that. I can say that because I am one, and I've done this myself. So I know exactly how messy and overwhelming it can feel like. I'm going to cover how to do this fairly methodically, but you'll hear me say towards the end once or twice to go with your gut when it all comes down to it. Because, well, we can talk about a lot of different ideas, which we will talk about properly in terms of language and finance and client groups, age groups, gender, geography, length of practice and speciality and therapy types and therapist types. The relationship between you guys, the likability factor has to be there at some point. There's lots of studies that have been done over time that suggest that regardless of what kind of therapy or anything else involved, that the quality that determines success the most tends to be the relationship between therapist and client. So a lot of food for thought. You can break this down into logistics and personal. And some of these ideas you can check very easily by looking at some of the check boxes. So, for example, Psychology Today is a directory. APA, the American Psychological Association, has a directory. There's tons of directories out there, and they will vary in terms of accessibility. So I can speak from personal experience. So Psychology Today, for example, I struggle to play the videos, but I can read all the information on the different profiles and I can access the check boxes. So if I'm checking a checkbox about concessionary rates or client groups or various things like that, I can physically do that. So accessibility will vary, but they won't vary massively. I can say for a fact that if you do have any issues, because I've tried this myself, I'm struggling to access this or that, can you help me? Like an organizer on the other, they will be falling over themselves to help you, because helping you means they will get some remuneration out of it at some point down the line, because you're paying for their services. And not just the directories, but if you're on somebody's website or other internet presence and you're struggling to access something, just shoot them an email. If you like the look and sound of them, well, I can't really read your something or other or access your something else. Again, they will bend over backwards to help you access their stuff, because accessing their stuff is more likely you will go with them. Right. The easy bits. Language. I'm not just talking about, do they speak your language, as in English is my first language?
It might be yours. It might not be your first language, might be Spanish or just about anything else. And you may prefer to have your therapy in your first language. So you don't have to think through, okay, what word do I mean here and there? I mean, there's loads of tech now. It's way easier to have a session where there's a bit of a delay between what you say, what's said back to you, and all the rest of it. Using translation apps, it can slow the session down. Interpreters are used sometimes in sessions. But so you might just literally want to go with your first language, and that's a really easy one to check in a checkbox of a directory. But then another aspect of language, which may not be quite so obvious, is their use of language. Depending on the age group might filter into this, but are they a bit old-fashioned in their use of language or really contemporary in their use of language? I'm in my 30s and you might be in your 30s or you might be in your 70s and the language I use is really off to you, or vice versa. You know, you might be in your 30s or 40s and therapists you're looking into is in their 60s or 70s and they might talk as if they are still kind of living in the 80s or something. So that might be something that is not wholly obvious in the checkboxes. You could do a kind of filtering out of, I don't think you can filter out by age group, but you can certainly tell from reading some of the profiles. The sighted bods can just do a short circuit and look at their photo. They look like they could be my child. I can't really go with them. Or they look old enough to be my grandparent. I really don't want to share my pain and suffering with one of my grandparents or somebody who looks a bit like that. We, as people who are not sighted bods, will need to do a bit more digging into that. And it may be obvious from, let's say, their qualifications. So depending on which directory you're reading or even their websites, they will have their certifications for counselling. And they will have some, we've already talked about this in a previous presentation, which is if they don't have some, then run for it. So they will have something to show for themselves, and it will generally say what it is and also when it was issued. So that will give you a clue as to, you know, how long they've been qualified, and that will help you determine how old they are. And in terms of their experience, so if they've had a decade of experience on something or 20 years of experience, then you know they weren't falling out of the cradle doing that. So you need to add at least 20 years on to that. You know, so you can piece this together. Where it can get a bit more vague is if they've had a wealth of experience. You're like, well, how long is that? But read between the lines. Client groups. So if you're an adult, you're reading about somebody and their specialism is the sort of toddlers age group or adolescent specialism, then they may or may not be for you. You might need to read what else they can do. They might sort of gravitate towards a kind of 7 to 10. So people can specialize in working with individuals, children, families, couples, or groups. You know, there's group therapy as well. And there's a difference between somebody choosing to work with this client group or that client group and somebody specializing in it. This is something that you can check in the checkboxes. So just check individuals or like adults. Some directories will talk about 0 to 12. Some will talk about 13 to 17 and then 18 to 34/34 to 70, you know, that kind of thing, or just older adults. Even when you check the checkbox, you will still find people who give therapy to people in your age group, but also treat other age groups. So do you want somebody who focuses on your age group, or do you want somebody you don't really mind if, as well as individuals, they help children and families and couples and marriage and relationships and the rest of it? So it's something to think about. Age. We've touched on this a little bit already, and how you need to be a bit Sherlock to work out their age and age group. But also there's somebody's chronological age and somebody's mental age, and the older someone gets, the less relevant that becomes. So if I'm working with a child, I'm thinking about what their chronological age is and what their developmental age is. So you might get a 12-year-old who comes across as 10. You know, I met somebody who was 10 yesterday, and I'm a performer, as you guys know. And I was in the theatre, and this 10-year-old person was playing the piano like they were 25 out of college. And their demeanour was very different, very, very kind of self-assured and a lot older than 10. But as an adult, and as if you're working with a therapist, This isn't something you're going to get from a checkbox. It's something you're going to have to glean from reading their social or internet presence in directories and their own website, if they have one. They might do videos. It depends. To get a sense of what age they are and how they come across. So there might be a young 50 or a really old 30. But do you care? Work out what you actually care about. So I'm talking about some of these parameters to help you focus in on what's important to you. Gender, that's an easy one to check in a checkbox. Male, female, non-binary, trans. You may care very, very much if the person you want to work with is the same gender as yourself. So, for example, if you're a female and you want to talk about women's issues, and you might feel that even if a male therapist is well versed in female issues, the thought of talking to a man about it is not your cup of tea, in which case you will care very much. You might not give a stuff what gender the therapist is, as long as they can help you with your thingy. So again, work out what's important to you. You don't have to read a profile or anything. You can just tick a checkbox for that one. Geography is another one. Again, very easy. This is more of an edit field than a checkbox. It doesn't matter whether you're on a directory or a website or not. Then you type in I was going to say postcode, but zip code of where you are to help you narrow this down. Even if you want to work virtually, I would suggest using this function just to help you narrow it down, because as I said at the top of the session, there are lots and lots and lots of choices, and it can cut the number significantly of the people to choose from if you select this aspect. And just a quick note about geography is that, as you know, or you may not know, but you ought to know, that therapists are licensed by state. I'll repeat that, they are licensed by state. So if you're in one state and you want to work with somebody in another state and they are not licensed in your state, they cannot work with you, even if you're doing it on Zoom or the telephone or something or other. And this works even if you have a therapist in your own state and you take a road trip and then have a needed therapy session. You can't then have that session with your therapist who is in your home state and you're in a different state to them. It is very, 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 very strict on that. And you don't need to take my word for it. You can look this up from your state licensing board. That is how it works in America. And another one on geography is that, you might want to have therapy in person, but to work out what it will cost you to do that. We'll touch on the finances later on because it's a whole juicy section, which is a fun one. For me, it's not necessarily fun for you. It will be fun for you once I crack the code for you. But anyway, the geography thing, it will cost you whatever the therapist's fees are, and then it will cost you however much you need to spend on transport to get to and from, if you're doing it in person. Some therapists, not me, some therapists will come to your home. And so you kind of get the perks of having your therapy in person without having to cope with mobility issues and transport and so on and so on and so on and so on. And there will be a cost added to that because it will cost them to get to you and away again. So they will factor that in. Some therapists will have an in-person fee and a seeing them at their home fee or a virtual fee because they'll be renting rooms and things. So some therapists just make everybody pay the same, which you could argue is possibly fairer. I don't know. And some will have an in-person fee that may be a $10, $15, $20 difference because that's literally what the room rental is. So that's geography. You might want to choose virtual, but as I said earlier, cannot stress this enough, be careful about who you pick in terms of the state you're in and the state they're in. They have to match because otherwise you can't work together. And they will tell you. And it would be awful if you found, the therapist of your dreams on a directory website or something or other, and they're not in the right state. And you're like, but we're working on virtual anyway. It doesn't matter. It does. It seriously, seriously does matter. And then they would be the one to have to tell you after going through all this and doing your shortlist and everything. That'd be awful. Right. Length of practice. We covered this a tiny bit earlier as well, and you may or may not care about this, but it may matter to you. You might think about how much experience they have in the issue you want help with. And the longer they've been in practice, the more likely they will have experience in the thing you want help with. It might not have any bearing whatsoever. So length of practice. And you'll get clues on this. You can't necessarily do the old checkbox thingy. You do actually have to go in and read about whoever it was. So they might say they have 5 years experience in such and such a field, or 10 years experience helping people, or 20 or 30 years. And you can make an educated guess as to whether they can help you with your issue or not. You can select on directories by issue, so depression, anxiety, grief, relationship, take your pick. And you will draw in your search list therapists who work with whatever it is and therapists who specialize in whatever it is. And you may want a specialist, you may not. So this kind of ties in together with the kind of length of practice and level of experience that person has and the speciality. And I want to talk briefly about the difference between core training and that kind of scope of competence and that specialism idea. So with core counselling training, issues like stress and anxiety and depression are taught even at the most basic level. Even a therapist who has no further development or continuous professional development in this area, I mean, we all have to do a certain amount of continuous professional development every year while we're in practice. And it's good practice to do that whether you're practicing or not. If you've taken a break or something, it's still a good idea to do CPD. But all of them will be doing something along the lines of the issues that they tend to want to specialise in. The core training will cover things like that. And then it's a question of whether that person specialises in that. And you can tell by their certificates because it will list some of the things they specialise in, or they might list some of the CPD they've had, and it will have titles like, I'm being silly now, but, depression's are us or something. So you'll be able to tell without having to speak to them yet. And if they do specialise in your area, let's say it's depression or grief, they will shout about it in their web presence because they want to attract clients who fit within their specialism. I don't work with drug addiction, for example, so I don't say a word about that on my paraphernalia because I don't want to attract clients with drug issues because I can't help them. Then I'd be saying, well, I can't help you. But I wouldn't then just kind of goodbye and good luck. I would try and help find somebody who can work with them and who specialises in them. Yeah, because therapists have things like referral networks where they know, like, and trust other people who specialise in things they don't specialise in. So there's the idea of specialising in stuff, which extends beyond the core training. There's scope of competence. So if somebody has a long list of things, so how directories work is, hi, I'm so-and-so, and I'm a therapist based somewhere, and my favourite things are this, that, and the other. Underneath the blurb, as it were, that they have about themselves, there will be a catalogue of things they help with. Some of those things will be specialties, and some of those things will be things they help with that while they don't specialise in them, they are fairly knowledgeable in them. So you have to decide for yourself how much you care about that specialism aspect. And if it is a specialty, do you care about it being something that they've had lots of training in, or professional experience in, or lived experience of? So let's take disability. Do you care about the person you're going to work with having a speciality in disability? And if so, is their specialism based on training, or is it based on professional experience, as in, so talking about myself for a second, I'm disabled, which I hope you know that. And I've had professional client experience of it, and I've had extensive training in it. So you could say I'm a triple threat in that direction. So you might want a clinician who has a specialty in it and who has some understanding of it, and you don't really mind that they're not disabled themselves as long as they understand enough to help you with your something or other. You might want to work with somebody who you don't really mind if they're trained in it or not, but if they've got enough experience, that's good enough for you. So it comes down to finding out what you are prepared to live with and without. And I'll say it again, go with your gut on these things. So coming back to scope of competence, you might find somebody who is knowledgeable enough, but just doesn't really get it in terms of from a personal perspective, but is more than capable of imagining your point of view. And that might be more than adequate to help you. Therapy types. Now, most of us don't really know one type of therapy from the other. So if somebody goes on about how they're an analyst or a behaviorist or a humanist, it might just kind of wash past. But briefly, you will hear comments on the internet about how there are hundreds of types of therapy, there's hundreds of them. And while there are lots of different types, they will all fit into one of several categories. So the big three is humanism, behavioral or cognitive behavioral, and it is analytical. Now, another area, fourth area that's sprung up quite a bit is the kind of body-centric ones. So the humanist traditions include things like person-centered therapy or client-led and transactional analysis. There isn't analysis, even though it sounds a bit like that. And some other traditions in and along those lines. So the gist of the humanist theories is this idea of the client being, having self-agency and knowing what they need, which is the complete opposite of analysis, which is the person is telling you and interpreting for you the issues, and there's a root cause to your issues. And so the humanist perspective is that people are inherently good and seeing the best in people, and that person knows what they need. And to a greater or lesser extent, the relationship between the therapist and client is the therapy. This is a sort of person-centered perspective. I'm not going to go into too much detail about transactional analysis and Gestalt. If you want to ask me questions about it later, fair enough, but I'm really not going to go on about that now. So essentially that's what the humanism stuff is. The relationship is the therapy, and you don't see too many tools and techniques and strategies in it because the client knows what they need and the therapist is there to walk alongside in the pain and help you process and meet you where you are. And then the space is there for you to make of it what you will, because it's your session in your space. And that's where I sit philosophically, although I use tools from other stuff when appropriate, because philosophically, all of them are quite different. Behavioral or cognitive behavioral, problem, solve, problem, solve. So maladaptive thoughts or feelings or behaviors, you change the thought to change the feeling, which may change the behavior, or you might change your behavior, which may change how you feel, and that may change how you think. So the cognitive behavioral space is there's an issue and we'll go into what the issue is and then how to solve it. It's a fixie one. There's lots of different ideas in that. So there's cognitive behavior therapy, cognitive therapy, MBCT, which is mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. There's lots in there. DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. And that's leaning more towards the behavioral aspect, as in these are the behaviors, switch to these new behaviors, and that ought to change thoughts and feelings. Analysis, which is the daddy. I just mean that it all stems back to that. Like a lot of these other ones are breakaway from that. So there's various people, and we're talking about the 1900s and sometimes earlier, where this notion of therapy comes in. And then in the 20th century, so the 1800s has kind of got going. Then in the 20th century, so the 1900s, there's the breakaways of humanism and cognitive behavioral and all of that stuff. So analysis is kind of what it sounds like. There's a root cause to every issue. So you might be feeling awful now, but chances are the seeds of that started earlier on. So we might talk about a few years ago. We might talk about childhood or relational issues in childhood with parents, which is how analysis gets a really bad rep in the movies. Like, you're having a problem today. Well, talk about what happened with your mother when you were 2. And I'm being a bit flippant, but I think you know exactly what I mean. So as I've said, I use tools from the different ones, but philosophically, I'm a person-centered therapist, so I will offer tools and suggestions from some of the other ones where you're free to take what you need from it if you would like to. And if you don't, I have to respect your decision, regardless of what I may or may not think about it. I tend to work with my clients, not at them. Analysis has a bit of a rep for like, well, this is what's happening for you, and you know what you should do right now. Oh, yes. So the body-centric ones tend to not use too many words, really, and it's about focusing on the sensations in the body and the somatic experiences. You'll hear that quite a lot in some of the body-centric ideas, and I think they're quite useful, especially if the pain is too difficult to talk about. But you can express it in other ways, like looking at body and body movement and breathing and various things like that. And there's creative approaches, so an even further category. And this is where things like music therapy, art therapy, dance, drama therapy, psychodrama, narrative therapy, which is using a lot of kind of storytelling and writing stuff. The sky's the limit when it comes to therapy. So in a music therapy session or an art therapy session, the music or the art is the vehicle for expression and processing in the therapy. So again, you don't need to use too many words, but you can still express the pain with a piece of music, or just kind of expressing yourself by using the different instruments in the session. Or if you're in art therapy, I know art therapy, we automatically gravitate to painting. And it's like, well, you can use lots of other art tools, like tactile art. You know, I know somebody who's an artist who does a lot of audio art. So, as I said, the sky's the limit. But anyway, you can look at therapy type in the checkboxes of directories and various places like that to help you decide, okay, I want this kind of therapy or I want that kind of therapy. You might decide that you don't really know what kind you need, and it's about, well, can this person help me? And it doesn't really matter if they're a behaviorist or an analyst or a thisist, as long as they can help me with my thing. And that's fine. You might want to pick somebody who's integrative or eclectic. Eclectic is, these are the things I can draw on, and what would you like me to do today? And integrative is more of a blend. So I'm integrative, but even if somebody's integrative, you'll find that they lean more one way than another one. So for example, as I said, I'm person-centered in my philosophy, but I use tools from lots of other ones. You might feel that you want to kind of problem solve, fix this thing philosophy, in which case I'm not for you, am I really? So it's go with your gut, and I keep saying that, but I mean it. Or method of delivery, I think we've covered this. So we've talked about in person or virtual, but even in virtual, there are different ways of doing this. So there can be video conferencing, it can be over the phone, it can be text-based. So I do all of them apart from the in-person thing. There are perks to doing it over the phone. You don't really have to be on camera. I wouldn't worry about the video conferencing being on camera, because the therapist really has to go with what you need. So they might feel discomfort with you being off camera. I had a therapist years ago who insisted I was on camera. I don't think that would happen today. I really don't. So, I mean, this was like 2017-ish. I think the world has moved on an awful lot since then. And the therapist is there for you and your needs. So if you can't stand being on camera, they need to roll with it. Right? I have to be on camera because that's what my clients need from me. They want to see my face, etc., and see my reactions and things like that. So text-based, you can't really do tone of voice in that, but it may be something good for you if you have dual sensory loss, for example, and you find yakking just a faff, or listening to the other person, and it might be easier to read their responses on a braille display. There's a host of other reasons why text-based might be more useful than speaking or using oral speech. But notice that they can't do tone of voice with you and you can't do tone of voice with them. So they'll be asking you more questions rather than just perceiving your feelings in general, kind of listening to you / seeing you. And the sort of body language interpretation, you don't really get much of that in texting. So they'll be asking you more stuff, and it will feel possibly like you're not getting as long a session as another person because it takes a little while to write things down. So there's pros and cons of all these things. I don't think they'll charge any less for it. I don't. That might be something you want to ask. If you get to the asking stage, we're still in the kind of checkboxes portion of our how to search strategy. And as I said earlier, some of them can come to you. And specialist areas. So we've talked about issues they specialize in, but the kinds of places the therapists work and whether you care about that. So whether their experience is taken in specializing working in schools or hospitals or prisons, you may or may not care about that. It may be really important to you, and it may have a bearing on their availability. So if they're working in a prison this many days a week and they're tutoring therapists another day in the week and they're working in a school another day of the week, their availability will be a lot less than somebody who is working solely in private practice, for example. So while you may not care if they're a prison's therapist by day and a private therapist by night, just be aware that it may filter into flexibility. They might not be able to be flexible with you because they're spread quite thin. So the kind of therapist they are. So we've talked about therapy types, whether they're a humanist or a behaviorist or a cognitive behaviorist or an analyst. It's a long day. It's later in the day for me than for you, okay? So we've talked about that, but we haven't talked about the kind of therapist they are. As in, so I'm a psychotherapeutic counsellor. I know it sounds a bit weird. So psychotherapist or counsellor, a lot of them tend to use these terms interchangeably. Counselling tends to be a bit shorter term than psychotherapy, and psychotherapy tends to focus on lots of different areas of your life. So briefly, if there's an issue with your life, as in an overarching way, deep-seated patterns, long-term issues that affect lots of areas of your life, that tends to be more psychotherapy. If there's a problem in your life, so life is going well apart from this bit of it, like a bereavement or a divorce or a stress at work or something like that, then it tends to be counselling. Some people offer counselling and psychotherapy, so I offer both. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is whether you want somebody who is a counsellor or psychotherapist, or whether you want somebody who's a psychologist or a psychiatrist with a psychotherapeutic or counselling leaning. And again, that will be abundantly clear from the information that you read on the internet about them, because that will be one of the first things they say, along with what their name is and what kind of counsellor they are, if they are one, and the specialism they have, as in adults, adolescents, and all the rest of it. And I did promise a decoding of the financial issues in therapy. Broadly speaking, practitioners will have fees, and we've covered the difference between some of them might have in-person fees or virtual fees, or everybody pays the same and just suck it up. The other bit is the fees themselves. So there will be a fee for the session as it is, and some therapists like myself will have a sliding scale. So I'm going to pick a fee that is just complete nonsense, just to make it easy, of $100 an hour. And that is an insane fee and a horrible fee, but it's an easy one to then add and subtract from, okay? Mathematician, I'm not. Right, so let's say we start with $100 an hour for an adult, and that is the fee. And a therapy hour, by the way, is 50 minutes, 50. I know, that's so that we have a 10-minute buffer to write notes and go to the toilet or whatever before the next person. So a therapy hour is $100. So that person, you can check a checkbox, by the way, for concessionary rates. But if they start at $100, how much realistically can they concede? Really, a fiver, a 10, like. But let's say they do concede, so they will have what is known as a sliding scale. So if we have the mythical practitioner of $100 a therapy hour, who has a sliding scale between, let's say, $5, $10, $15. So you might be paying $95 or $90 or $85. They might be specific about what their concession rates are for. I like to think I can help people who are on benefits or social security, speaking the language across the pond. So that sliding scale might be for people on social security or unemployed people or refugees or low income families. Mine also covers students, so students in general, and specifically trainee counsellors. Most, if not all of them, but most have to have some kind of therapy during their training on a very basic level so that they at the very least, will know what it feels like to be in therapy. And they're not just kind of sitting there in their ivory therapy tower. They will have some empathy and some lived experience of what it feels like. Therapy trainings, without going on about, I won't bore you with this, but they're hellishly expensive. So any way I can help with that. These are some of the costs that they have to incur: personal therapy, supervision, insurance. So that's some of what my sliding scale will cope with. So you've got the fee of $100, which could have a sliding scale, and depending on what the sliding scale is applied to. And a lot of therapists, if they have a sliding scale, will say something like, contact me if this applies to you, or, find out if I can do this, or something like that. I'm not putting this very elegantly, but the long and the short of it is that they will want you to contact them to see if they can help with that. So how to search? You can search for concessionary rates. You can also, in some directories, set a ceiling. So let's say, because it'd be awful to find the therapist of your dreams who's charging $100 or $150 and your ceiling is $40. I'm just picking numbers out of the air, okay? So you can set your ceiling in the checkboxes so that when people appear in your suggestions, that they will then match the geography and the issue and the client group. So you won't get, hopefully you shouldn't get anyway, if you're looking for individual help and there's a couples and marriage specialist come at the top of your feed, it really shouldn't happen like that, okay? So this kind of pricey ceiling should also kick in. So another aspect of finance can be discounts on top of or parallel to sliding scales. So we'll come back to the $100 thing because it's easiest for me. So let's say you've got this mythical person charging $100 per therapy hour. They've got a sliding scale, which means you could be, depending on your financial circumstances and level of income and all that, be charged $85 an hour. So sometimes on top of that, there might be discounts, and those discounts might be to do with how many sessions you book at a time. So that's how my discount scheme works. The more sessions you book at one go, so it's booked and paid for. You can't book 4 and then pay for them one at a time. It's booked and paid for. It is cheaper for you. So that's something that they might do. If the therapist of your dreams takes insurance, and this is the interesting bit, takes and accepts the insurance from your insurance provider, then technically you won't be paying anything. But you will need to check in with your insurer that they will accept this particular person. So let's go back to our $100 an hour mythical therapist, and your insurer doesn't accept that. They want to know, why you want that one instead of the one that charges $50. And you might need to have a discussion with them. There's always a cost to these things. So if you are using insurance to pay for it, chances are it won't be on your own terms, it'll be on their terms. So this is the amount of sessions you can have. And I don't know the name of it in America. I'm very sorry about this. But over here in the UK, there's something called Employee Assistance Program. So if you are employed and have a job, there will be some sort of therapy service tied to it where you will have maybe 6/12 sessions paid for by the company you are employed by. And over here it's EAP, Employee Assistance Program. So I would, if you have a job, as in a salary job rather than a freelance person like myself doing singing and acting and voiceover and writing and all the rest of it, an actual employed salaried job. It doesn't matter how high or how low the salary is and you're on a payroll, they will most likely have something like this. And a lot of unions have this as well. Most of them will have some kind of helpline and reference point. So again, so coming back to insurance, if you're getting help through insurance and using insurance to pay for it, then there will be a finite number of sessions allocated and the length of them. And maybe not, but you will need to find this out. The kind of therapy that you will be expecting will possibly be dictated by the insurer. And the therapist will need to make contact with them and possibly share reports about you. Nothing nitty gritty and juicy. It will be known as progress notes. And I have a video on my YouTube channel about the difference between process notes and progress notes. Briefly, process notes are the therapist's private notes, and progress notes are the ones which could possibly be shared with a third party, like an insurance provider, if there was ever a criminal proceedings or a court case of any kind, then they might be ordered by the police. But those are the notes that would be circulated. And it would, when I say circulated, I mean sent to the required party, as in police. And we're talking about things like session date and length and time and the observable information in front of the therapist and the information they might interpret from the session, and then maybe 1 or 2 lines about the content. So there's not pages of stuff about he said, she said, I goes and he goes. It's literally, if you're talking about, for example, if you're talking about a row you had with your partner last night, it might say family conflict discussed. Okay, that's all. But there will be information sent to other parties if you're taking insurance. So just food for thought. It's not something to put you off using insurance. You may jolly well have to use insurance and take every advantage of fee breaks and billable codes possible. So we've talked a bit about finance, and we've talked about lots of different other issues where you can literally check boxes and read. So now we come to more of the personal side, where you're going to have to read their profiles and then shorten your shortlist. So at the top of the hour, I said just how many thousands you might have to choose from. And the parameters I've talked about narrowing it down will reduce it rather a lot, but you'll still have quite a few to look at, and you'll need to read their profiles in a little bit of detail, then narrow it down even further and find out the things you care about. And also reading and possibly listening to and playing some videos, if they have some, and just investigating their web presence to find out about their personality and to dig into this likability factor, because trust me, it will be important. And the longer term you work with somebody, the more important this will become. So if you're working maybe 2 to 4 to 6 weeks with somebody, I think it's still really important, but it'll be even more important if instead of, 6 weeks, we're talking about 6 months or 2 years. And it'll be the little things that may get you. So I know this bit's easier said than done, because there's only so much reading and studying of websites and social media profiles, if any, that you can do before you have to do that thing called speaking to some people. And he's hoping that by this point that your shortlist will be single digits, or at least the maximum will be 10. When you are speaking to them, you might want to have a list of questions for them. You might not. But I would say that if you do want to have a list of questions, that list should have some of the things that you haven't been able to answer for yourself. The things that the ingredients of this puzzle that you're trying to build up of what is this person like, which are missing from the information that you have gathered from their directory profiles, websites, social media stuff, and so on. The human behind the therapy practice. Now, you may want someone like you, so you can be on their wavelength, or you may want someone different from you entirely. So as a case in point, I'm a performer. I've said in different places that I'm a singer, I'm an actor, I'm a voiceover, I teach voice, I teach Braille. And if you're a performer yourself and you want somebody who understands the rigors of that and how life-consuming it can be, fair enough. go with your gut. And if your first impression of when you hear that is like, oh, she might understand me, or that's really interesting, then that's something to bear in mind. If your reaction is, oh, no, an arty type, give me strength, then I'm not for you. And I'll say it again, go with your gut. Assess your priorities, work out what you're prepared to live with and what you're not. Find out the things that are important to you, and it's unlikely that you will get every single thing on your ideal list met. Like the dating apps, like the title of this session. Like dating, there's lots of choices, and people talk about the ideal partner. And therapy is a partnership. It's not that kind of partnership, but it is a sense of working with somebody on your stuff. It's not like medical where they're doing things to you or throwing stuff at you. It is working with. So getting a clear idea about the ingredients where you think, yes, I can imagine working with this person, or I can't, And something that is useful, especially if you don't feel completely sure by speaking to somebody. Sometimes you might even have to have one session with somebody before you absolutely make that decision. So sometimes you might be more than clear just by talking to them on the phone and having a consultation. I don't think there are too many therapists who will make you pay for a consultation. I think that is really mean. I'm just saying that guardedly because I could be proved wrong. I certainly have them free, and on the directories I'm on, most people offer a free kind of 15, 20 minutes to just scope the lie of the land. Actual sessions, which are 50 minutes, will be paid. And as I said, you may need to have a trial session with somebody. Sometimes people have a different fee for that. By the way, they might have a smaller fee for a trial session. I don't. My fees are my fees. Apart from the kind of sliding scale thing and discounts and stuff like that. But I don't have a trial session fee and a real session fee. I just don't. But some people do. Back in the day, they used to have a try before you buy. So there was a consultation and a free session, and then sessions got going. But as I say, this is going back to like the late noughties, kind of 2010 and beyond. People do not do that anymore. And I certainly don't. So work out your priorities. And so, yes, I have finally got to the end of my talk. I apologize that it was really, really long, but there's still plenty of time for questions, comments, observations. If you are playing this video on YouTube, the presentation has come to an end, and look after yourselves. If you're live with me in the room, it's time for the questions, comments, observations, and it's just us from this point.